The old bus wheezed to a stop at the corner of Maple Street, and Elena stepped off with her small duffel bag clutched tightly in her hands. The morning air was crisp, and she could see her breath forming small clouds as she looked up at the towering iron gates ahead of her. Behind those gates stood the largest house she had ever seen in real life. 3 stories of cream-colored stone rose up like a castle, with windows that sparkled in the early sunlight and gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Elena checked the crumpled piece of paper in her pocket one more time. Yes, this was the right address. She had gotten the job through Mrs. Patterson, who cleaned houses on the other side of town. When Mrs. Patterson mentioned that her friend's employer needed a new housekeeper, Elena jumped at the chance. The pay was better than anything she could find elsewhere, and right now, every dollar mattered more than she could explain. She pressed the buzzer at the gate and waited. A voice crackled through the intercom asking for her name. When she replied, the gate slowly swung open with a soft humming sound. Elena walked up the long driveway, her worn sneakers crunching on the perfectly maintained gravel. The closer she got to the house, the more nervous she became. She had cleaned houses before, but nothing like this. This place probably cost more than she would make in her entire lifetime. The front door was enormous, made of dark wood with brass handles that gleamed like gold. Before she could knock, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s wearing a neat gray suit. Her hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and she carried a tablet computer in her hand. "You must be Elena," the woman said with a professional smile. "I'm Miss Johnson, Mr. Whitmore's personal assistant, right on time. He appreciates punctuality." Elena nodded and followed Miss Johnson into the house. The moment she stepped inside, her jaw nearly dropped. The entrance hall was bigger than her entire apartment. A crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting tiny rainbows on the white marble floor. Paintings in gold frames lined the walls, and fresh flowers sat in vases. That probably cost more than her monthly rent, but what really caught her attention was the piano. It sat in the center of the main hall like a beautiful black sculpture. It was a grand piano, the kind she had only seen in concert halls and movies. The wood was so polished that she could see her reflection in it, and the keys looked like perfect white and black teeth waiting to sing. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Miss Johnson noticed her staring. "It's a Steinway. Mr. Whitmore had it imported from Germany. Cost more than most people's houses." Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She could imagine how it would sound, how the keys would feel under her fingers, but she quickly looked away. She wasn't here to dream about pianos. She was here to work. Ms. Johnson led her through room after room, each one more impressive than the last. There was a library with books from floor to ceiling, a dining room with a table that could seat 20 people, and a kitchen that looked like something from a cooking show. Everything was spotless and perfectly arranged. "The previous housekeeper left suddenly," Miss Johnson explained as they walked. "Family emergency. Mr. Whitmore expects the same level of care for his home. He's very particular about things being done properly." They ended up in a small office near the kitchen. Miss Johnson handed Elena a folder filled with papers and a uniform still in plastic wrapping. "Your schedule, house rules, and emergency contacts are all in there," she said. "You'll work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Saturdays when Mr. Whitmore entertains, which isn't often. The uniform should fit, but let me know if you need a different size." Elena flipped through the papers, trying to absorb all the information. The house rules were 3 pages long. No personal phone calls during work hours. No guests allowed. No touching Mr. Whitmore's personal items without permission. Clean the piano weekly, but do not play it under any circumstances. That last rule made her heart sink a little, but she understood. Rich people probably didn't want their housekeepers touching their expensive things. "Any questions so far?" Miss Johnson asked. "When will I meet Mr. Whitmore?" Elena asked. "He's in his study working. A very busy man. He might come out to meet you, but don't take it personally if he doesn't. He's not much for small talk with the staff." Just then, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Miss Johnson straightened up and smoothed her jacket. A tall man appeared in the doorway. He was probably in his late 30s, with dark hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His suit looked expensive, and he wore a watch that caught the light as he moved. "Miss Johnson, is this the new housekeeper?" His voice was deep and businesslike. "Yes, sir, this is Elena Martinez." Elena stood up quickly, almost knocking over her chair. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Whitmore." He looked her up and down for a moment, as if he was inspecting something he might buy. His expression didn't give away what he was thinking. "You come with good references," he said finally. "Mrs. Patterson speaks highly of your work." "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." "I expect more than your best. I expect perfection. This house runs on schedule and precision. I don't tolerate mistakes or carelessness." He paused and looked directly at her. "I also don't tolerate people who think they can help themselves to things that don't belong to them. Everything in this house has its place and purpose." Elena felt her cheeks burn. "Of course, sir, I understand." "Good." He turned to Miss Johnson. "Show her what needs to be done today. I'll be in meetings until this evening." With that, he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hall. Elena let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "Don't worry," Miss Johnson said quietly. "He's not as scary as he seems. He just likes things done right. Come on, I'll show you where the cleaning supplies are kept." For the rest of the morning, Miss Johnson walked Elena through her duties. Dust the furniture with special cloths that wouldn't scratch. Vacuum in a specific pattern so the carpet always looked perfect. Clean the windows with a solution that didn't leave streaks. Polish the silver carefully and put everything back exactly where it belonged. "The piano gets dusted every Tuesday and Friday," Miss Johnson explained when they reached the main hall again. "Use this special cloth and be very gentle. Don't press the keys or lift the lid. Mr. Whitmore is very protective of it." Elena nodded and took the soft cloth. As they stood next to the piano, she could smell the wood polish and see her reflection in the glossy surface. Her fingers itched to touch the keys just once, to hear what this magnificent instrument sounded like. "Has anyone ever played it?" she asked. Miss Johnson shrugged. "Not since I've worked here, and that's been 5 years. Mr. Whitmore doesn't play, as far as I know. It's more like a very expensive decoration." What a waste, Elena thought but didn't say. A piano like this was meant to be played, meant to fill a house with music and life. Instead, it sat silent like a beautiful bird. In a cage. By lunchtime, Elena was starting to get the hang of things. The house was big, but the work wasn't too different from other places she had cleaned. The main difference was that everything here was more expensive and required more careful handling. She ate her sandwich in the kitchen, looking out at the garden through the large windows. The afternoon passed quickly. Elena cleaned 2 guest bedrooms, a bathroom that was bigger than most people's kitchens, and polished furniture in the living room. Every hour or so, she would pass by the piano in the main hall. Each time, she would slow down just a little, imagining what it would be like to sit on that bench and let her fingers dance across those keys. At 5 o'clock, Miss Johnson found her putting away the vacuum cleaner. "Good first day," she said. "You'll get faster as you get used to the routine. Mr. Whitmore seemed satisfied with your work. He checked on me?" "He checks on everything. That's how he became so successful." Miss Johnson handed Elena an envelope. "Your first week's pay as promised, same time tomorrow?" Elena nodded and tucked the envelope into her purse without opening it. She would look at it later, when she was alone. Right now, she just wanted to get home to her mother and tell her about this strange, beautiful house where she would be working. As she walked back down the long driveway, Elena turned once to look at the house. It was even more impressive from the outside, with lights beginning to glow in some of the windows as evening approached. Somewhere inside that house was the most beautiful piano she had ever seen, sitting silent and untouched. She thought about her mother, waiting at home with her medications and doctor bills. She thought about the envelope in her purse and how much this job meant to their future. And she thought about that piano, calling to her like an old friend she wasn't allowed to visit tomorrow. She told herself she would focus on her work and nothing else. She couldn't afford to lose this job by breaking the rules. no matter how much her heart ached every time she walked past that silent, beautiful instrument. 2 weeks had passed since Elena started working at the Whitmore house, and she had settled into a comfortable routine. Every morning she would arrive at exactly 8 o'clock, change into her uniform, and begin her tasks. The house was so large that she had a different room to focus on each day, and by the end of the week, she would start the cycle all over again. She had learned Mr. Whitmore's schedule by heart. He left for his office at 7:30 sharp every morning, usually returning around 6 in the evening. Sometimes he worked late and didn't come home until after 8. On those days, Elena would finish her work in the quiet house, with only the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway to keep her company. Ms. Johnson had been right about Mr. Whitmore. He wasn't cruel, but he barely acknowledged Elena's presence. Sometimes she would see him in the morning, drinking his coffee and reading papers on his tablet. He would nod briefly in her direction, but that was usually the extent of their interaction. It was as if she was part of the furniture, necessary but invisible. Elena didn't mind being invisible. It made her job easier, and she had learned to find satisfaction in the small things. The way the morning light streamed through the clean windows, the smell of fresh flowers that Ms. Johnson had delivered twice a week, the quiet satisfaction of seeing a room transform from dusty to sparkling under her care. But there was one thing that never stopped calling to her: the piano. Every day she would dust it carefully with the special cloth, running her fingers along its smooth surface. She would polish the bench until it gleamed and make sure there wasn't a speck of dust on the keys. But she never pressed them. She never lifted the lid to see the strings inside. She followed the rules perfectly, even though it broke her heart. A little more each day. The piano was a 1960 Steinway Model D. She had discovered by reading the small gold letters near the music stand. She had looked it up on her phone during lunch break and learned that it was worth more than most people's houses. It was the same model used in concert halls around the world. The kind of instrument that professional pianists dreamed of playing. Every Tuesday and Friday, when she cleaned it, Elena would imagine what it would sound like. She would picture herself sitting on that polished bench, her fingers finding the familiar patterns on the keys. In her mind, she could hear the rich, warm tones filling the empty rooms of the house. But imagination was all she allowed herself until tonight. It was a Thursday evening, and Elena was running late with her work. She had spent extra time in the master bedroom, carefully cleaning around Mr. Whitmore's desk, where he had left important papers scattered about. She didn't want to disturb anything, so she had worked slowly and methodically, making sure everything was exactly as he had left it. By the time she finished, it was nearly 7 o'clock. Mr. Whitmore had mentioned that morning that he would be staying late at the office for a conference call with clients in Japan. Miss Johnson had left at 5 as usual. The house was completely empty except for Elena. She gathered her cleaning supplies and headed toward the supply closet near the kitchen. As she passed through the main hall, she stopped in front of the piano, as she always did. But tonight felt different. The house was so quiet, so peaceful. The late evening light coming through the tall windows cast long shadows across the polished floor. Elena set down her supplies and approached the piano slowly. She ran her hand along the smooth edge, feeling the perfect craftsmanship under her fingertips. What would it hurt to just sit on the bench for a moment? She wasn't going to play anything. She just wanted to know what it felt like to sit at such a beautiful instrument. The bench was positioned at the perfect height. Elena sat down carefully, her hands resting in her lap. From this angle, she could see the keys clearly. They were pristine white and deep black, arranged in the familiar pattern she had known since childhood. Her fingers twitched slightly, remembering the muscle memory of 1,000 hours of practice. She thought about her mother, probably sitting at home watching her evening shows and taking her medications. She thought about the bills that arrived every month, the doctor visits, the prescriptions that cost more than Elena made in a week. She thought about the dreams she had given up, the music school acceptance letter she had torn up, the competitions she would never enter. And then, almost without thinking, Elena's right hand moved to the keys. She pressed middle C very softly, so quietly that the sound was barely a whisper. but even that gentle touch sent a shiver through her entire body. The tone was perfect, rich and warm and full of possibilities. She pressed it again, slightly harder this time, and the sound filled the hall like a gentle bell. Elena looked around, quickly, making sure she was still alone. Her heart was beating fast, but she couldn't stop herself. She pressed a few more keys, playing a simple C major scale. The sound was everything she had imagined and more. Each note was clear and beautiful, hanging in the air for a moment before fading into silence. She tried to stop, but her fingers had their own ideas. Before she knew it, she was playing a simple melody, Für Elise by Beethoven. It was one of the first pieces she had ever learned, and her fingers remembered every note. The music flowed out of her like water, natural and effortless. The hall filled with sound, and Elena closed her eyes, letting herself get lost in the music. For the first time in years, she felt complete. This was who she was meant to be, not a housekeeper, not someone who cleaned other people's homes for money, but a musician, a pianist, someone who could take silence and turn it into something beautiful. She moved from Für Elise to Chopin's Minute Waltz, her fingers dancing across the keys with increasing confidence. The piano responded to her touch like it had been waiting. For her, every note was perfect, every chord rich and full. Elena felt tears running down her cheeks, but she didn't stop playing. The music transported her back to her childhood, to the small apartment where she had practiced on an old upright piano that her grandmother had given her. She remembered her first recital, wearing a white dress and shiny black shoes, playing for an audience of proud parents and grandparents. She remembered her teacher, Mrs. Chun, who had believed in her talent and pushed her to be better. She remembered the day she had decided to give it all up. Elena transitioned into Debussy's Clair de Lune, one of her favorite pieces. The gentle, flowing melody filled the hall like moonlight, soft and mysterious. She played with her eyes closed, letting her fingers find their own way across the keys. This was what she had been born to do. This was what she had sacrificed for love and duty. The piece came to its gentle conclusion, and Elena sat in the silence that followed. The last notes seemed to hang in the air, reluctant to fade away. She opened her eyes and looked around the hall, almost surprised to find herself back in the present moment. What had she done? She had broken the most important rule. She had touched Mr. Whitmore's piano, and not just touched it, she had played it. Really played it. If he found out, she would be fired immediately. No explanation, no second chances. She would lose this job that she needed so desperately. But even as the fear crept into her mind, Elena couldn't bring herself to regret what she had just done. For 20 minutes, she had been herself again. She had been the person she was meant to be, the person she had buried under years of sacrifice and responsibility. She stood up from the bench and carefully pushed it back to its exact position. She wiped down the keys with her cleaning cloth, making sure there were no fingerprints or smudges. Everything had to look exactly as it had before. As she gathered her cleaning supplies, Elena took one last look at the piano. It seemed to be waiting patiently for her to return, holding the memory of their music together. She knew she shouldn't do this again. She knew the risk was too great, but she also knew that she would. The music was too much a part of her to ignore. The piano was too beautiful to remain silent. And the feeling of completeness she had just experienced was too precious to give up. Elena finished her work quickly and headed toward the door. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, she could still hear the music in her head. The melody of Clair de Lune followed her down the driveway and onto the bus that would take her home. She didn't know that Mr. Whitmore's conference call had been canceled. She didn't know that he had returned home early and was walking up to his front door just as the last notes of her music faded away. She didn't know that he had stood frozen on his doorstep, listening to the most beautiful piano playing he had heard in years, and she didn't know that her secret was no longer a secret. Elena arrived at work the next morning with a strange mix of guilt and joy swirling in her chest. She had barely slept the night before, replaying every note she had played on that beautiful piano. Part of her felt terrible for breaking the rules, but another part of her felt more alive than she had in years. The music was still echoing in her mind when she walked through the front door at exactly 8 o'clock. The house seemed different somehow, though she couldn't put her finger on why. Maybe it was because she now shared a secret with it. She had filled those silent halls with music, even if it was just for a few precious minutes. As she changed into her uniform, Elena found herself humming quietly under her breath the opening melody of Clair de Lune. Her first task of the day was to clean the library. It was one of her favorite rooms, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the warm smell of old leather and paper. She worked methodically, dusting each shelf and carefully cleaning around the hundreds of books. Some of them looked like they were worth more than her monthly salary. As she worked, Elena kept glancing toward the doorway, listening for any signs that Mr. Whitmore was moving around the house. Usually she could hear his footsteps on the marble floors or the sound of his voice when he took phone calls. But this morning the house was unusually quiet around 10 o'clock. As she was putting away her cleaning supplies, Elena heard footsteps approaching the library. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that she recognized immediately. Her heart started beating faster, and she quickly busied herself with organizing the books on the lower shelf. Mr. Whitmore appeared in the doorway, but something was different about him today. Instead of his usual business suit, he was wearing dark jeans and a simple white shirt. His hair looked like he had run his hands through it several times, and there was an intensity in his eyes that Elena had never seen before. "Elena," he said, his voice sharper than usual. "I need to speak with you." She stood up quickly, smoothing down her uniform. "Yes, sir. Is everything all right? Did I miss something in my cleaning yesterday?" He stepped into the library and closed the door behind him. Elena's stomach dropped. In all her years of cleaning houses, she had learned that when an employer closed the door for a private conversation, it was never good news. "Let's talk about what you did yesterday evening," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. How did he know? She had been so careful to leave everything exactly as she found it. She had wiped down every key, positioned the bench perfectly, made sure. There wasn't a trace of evidence. I don't understand," she stammered. Though they both knew she was lying. Mr. Whitmore walked closer to her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Really? You don't understand? Then let me be more specific. Let's talk about you playing my piano last night." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Her legs felt weak, and she had to steady herself against the bookshelf. "Sir, I can explain. Explain what? Explain how you decided that the rules don't apply to you? Explain how you thought you could help yourself to my property when I specifically told you not to touch it." His voice was getting louder with each word, and Elena could see the anger building in his expression. She had never seen him lose his composure before, and it was terrifying. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I know I shouldn't have done it. I just I couldn't help myself." "You couldn't help yourself." He stepped even closer, and Elena could feel the heat of his anger. "That's your excuse? You couldn't control yourself around my piano?" Elena felt her own emotions starting to rise. Yes, she had broken the rules, but the way he was speaking to her like she was a child who had been caught stealing candy made something fierce awaken inside her. "It's not just any piano," she said, her voice stronger than before. "It's a 1960 Steinway Model D. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" "How beautiful." "And it just sits there, day after day, never being played, never making music. It's like having a Stradivarius violin and using it as a paperweight." Mr. Whitmore's eyes flashed with something that might have been surprise, but his anger didn't fade. "I don't care what you think about my piano or how I choose to use it. The point is that you're just a housekeeper. You're here to clean, not to play music. You're here to follow orders, not to make decisions about what should or shouldn't be played. Just a housekeeper." The words stung more than Elena had expected. She felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. "Just a housekeeper," she repeated, quietly. "Is that all I am to you?" "That's exactly what you are," he said coldly. "You're an employee. You clean my house, and I pay you for that service?" Nothing more, nothing less. The fact that you think you have the right to touch my belongings shows that you don't understand your place here. Elena felt something break inside her chest. She had spent 2 weeks being invisible in this house, being grateful for the opportunity to work here, being careful not to disturb anything or anyone. And this was how he saw her, as just another piece of furniture that happened to move around and clean things. "My place?" she said, her voice getting stronger. "You want to talk about my place? Let me tell you something about my place. I have been playing piano since I was 5 years old. I won the state youth competition 3 years in a row. I was accepted to Juilliard with a full scholarship." Mr. Whitmore's expression changed slightly, but Elena was too angry to notice. "I gave all of that up to take care of my sick mother. I work 3 jobs to pay for her medications and doctor visits. I clean houses during the day, I wait tables at night, and I tutor kids on weekends. So don't you dare tell me about my place, because my place should have been on a concert stage, not scrubbing your floors." The library fell silent except for the sound of Elena's heavy breathing. She couldn't believe she had just said all of that. She had basically guaranteed that she would be fired, but she couldn't bring herself to care anymore. The truth had been building up inside her for too long. Mr. Whitmore stared at her for a long moment, and Elena could see him processing what she had just told him. But when he spoke again, his voice was just as cold as before. "That's a very touching story," he said, "but it doesn't change the fact that you violated the terms of your employment. You touched something that you were specifically told not to touch." Elena felt tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "So what happens now? Are you going to fire me?" "I should fire you," he said. "Any other employer would have already called security and had you escorted out. But Mrs. Patterson vouched for you, and good housekeepers are hard to find." Elena waited, not daring to breathe. "You get one warning," he continued. "One, if you ever touch that piano again, if you ever take liberties with any of my belongings, again, you're gone. No explanation, no second chances. Do you understand me?" Elena nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, I understand." "It won't happen again." "It better not. Because despite whatever talents you think you have, despite whatever dreams you've given up, you are just a housekeeper in this house. That's your job, and that's all I expect from you." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "And Elena? Don't think that playing the victim will earn you any sympathy from me. We all make choices in life. You made yours." With that, he was gone, leaving Elena alone in the library with her shame and anger. She slumped against the bookshelf finally, letting the tears fall. The worst part wasn't that she had been caught or even that she had been humiliated. The worst part was that she knew he was right about one thing. She had made her choice. She had chosen her mother's health over her own dreams, and now she had to live with the consequences. But as she wiped her tears and tried to compose herself, Elena couldn't stop thinking about how the piano had sounded under her fingers. For those 20 minutes she hadn't been just a housekeeper. She had been a musician, an artist, a person with value beyond her ability to clean and dust and polish. Maybe Mr. Whitmore could tell her what her place was in his house, but he couldn't tell her who she really was inside. That was something he would never understand, no matter how many rules he made or how many times he reminded her that she was just the help. Elena picked up her cleaning supplies and headed toward the next room on her list. She had work to do, bills to pay, and a mother who depended on her. But she also had music in her soul, and no amount of humiliation could take that away from her. The piano would have to remain silent, but Elena's spirit never would. Mr. Whitmore couldn't concentrate on his work that day. He sat in his downtown office, staring at quarterly reports that might as well have been written in a foreign language. The numbers blurred together on his computer screen as his mind kept drifting back to his confrontation with Elena that morning. He had handled it poorly, and he knew it. The moment the words, "just a housekeeper," had left his mouth, he had seen something die in her eyes. But what else could he have done? She had broken the rules, violated his trust. He couldn't let his employees think they could do whatever they wanted in his home, yet something about her reaction had unsettled him. The way she had talked about the piano, not like someone who had looked it up on the internet, but like someone who truly understood its value. And those things she had said about Juilliard, about competitions, could any of that be true? By lunchtime, Mr. Whitmore found himself doing something he had never done before. Instead of reviewing contracts or taking business calls, he was sitting at his computer typing Elena's name into a search engine. Elena Martinez, pianist, came up with dozens of results. Mr. Whitmore clicked on the first one and found himself looking at a newspaper article from 8 years ago. The headline read, "Local teen wins state piano competition for third consecutive year." Below it was a photo of a young woman sitting at a piano, her hands poised over the keys, a bright smile on her face. It was definitely Elena, though she looked so different. Younger, of course, but also doubtful. There was a light in her eyes that Mr. Whitmore realized he had never seen in the woman who cleaned his house. This Elena looked like someone who believed the world was full of possibilities. He read the article twice. Elena Martinez, 17, had won the state youth piano competition for the third year running. Her performance of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 had earned her a standing ovation from the audience and praise from the judges. The article mentioned that she had been accepted to the prestigious Juilliard School of Music with a full scholarship and planned to pursue a career as a concert pianist. Mr. Whitmore sat back in his chair, feeling something uncomfortable twist in his stomach. He clicked on another link, then another. Each article painted the same picture: a talented young woman with a bright future ahead of her. There were photos of her at various competitions, always smiling, always confident, always surrounded by proud family members. The most recent article he could find was from 7 years ago. It was much shorter than the others, just a few lines in the local newspaper's community section. Local pianist Elena Martinez has withdrawn from Juilliard School of Music to care for her ailing mother, Rosa Martinez, who was recently diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder requiring extensive treatment. That was it. No follow-up articles, no mention of her returning to music. Elena Martinez, the promising young pianist, had simply disappeared from the public eye. Dr. Whitmore found himself looking up Rosa Martinez next. The search results were mostly medical bills and court documents, things that were public record but painful to read. Hospital stays, specialist appointments, experimental treatments that weren't covered by insurance. The financial records painted a clear picture of a family drowning in medical debt. He closed his laptop and walked to the window of his office, looking out at the city below. People hurried along the sidewalks, each carrying their own burdens, their own stories. How many of them had given up their dreams for someone they loved? How many of them were working jobs that were beneath their talents just to survive? The uncomfortable feeling in his stomach was getting worse. Mr. Whitmore was a successful businessman because he was good at reading people, at understanding what motivated them. But he had completely misread Elena. He had seen her as just another employee, when, in reality, she was someone who had sacrificed her entire future for her family. He thought about the way she had looked at his piano every time she cleaned it. He had assumed it was simple envy or curiosity. But now he understood. It must have been heartbreak. Every day she was forced to dust and polish an instrument that represented everything she had lost, and this morning he had stood in his library and told her she was just a housekeeper. He had dismissed her dreams, her talent, her sacrifice, as if none of it mattered. As if she was nothing more than a cleaning service with legs. Mr. Whitmore returned to his desk and picked up his phone, but then put it down again. What could he say? "Sorry I was cruel to you, but I looked you up online and now I feel bad." That would make things worse, not better. He tried to focus on his work for the rest of the afternoon, but it was impossible. Every time he started to read a document, he would remember the sound of Elena's playing from that night. He had only heard the last few minutes of it, Claire de Lune, but it had been extraordinary. Not just technically perfect, but emotionally rich in a way that professional recordings rarely captured. By 5 o'clock, Mr. Whitmore was packing up his briefcase and heading home earlier than usual. He told himself he had work to catch up on at home, but the truth was that he wanted to see Elena again. He needed to observe her to try to understand how he had gotten her so wrong. The house was quiet when he arrived. Elena's car wasn't in the driveway, which meant she had already finished for the day. Mr. Whitmore walked through the rooms she had cleaned, noting the perfection of her work. Every surface gleamed, every object was in its proper place. She took pride in what she did. Even if it wasn't what she was meant to be doing, he found himself in the main hall, standing in front of the piano. For the first time in years, he really looked at it. It was beautiful. He had bought it not because he played, but because it looked impressive. A status symbol, nothing more. But now, knowing that Elena had to clean it every week while remembering everything she had lost, it seemed almost cruel. Mr. Whitmore lifted the piano bench and sat down, something he hadn't done since the day it was delivered. The keys were clean and perfectly maintained, thanks to Elena's careful attention. He pressed middle C, and the sound filled the hall, rich and pure and full of potential. He wasn't a musician. He had taken piano lessons as a child, like most kids from wealthy families, but he had never shown any real talent or interest. The lessons had been just another item on his parents' checklist of things that well-educated children should do, but Elena had real talent. The kind of talent that could have taken her anywhere, done anything. And she had given it all up to take care of her mother. Mr. Whitmore closed the piano and walked to his study. He had some phone calls to make, some research to do. If he was going to fix this situation, he needed to understand it better first. He spent the evening learning about Rosa Martinez's condition. The autoimmune disorder was rare and expensive to treat, but there were new therapies available, if you could afford them. He looked up the costs of the medications, the specialist visits, the ongoing care that would be needed. No wonder Elena was working as a housekeeper. The medical bills alone would consume most people's entire income. The next morning, Mr. Whitmore arrived at the office early and called his personal lawyer. Then he called his financial advisor. By lunchtime, he had put several plans in motion. But the most important conversation would have to wait until he got home. Elena was in the kitchen when he arrived that evening, putting away her cleaning supplies. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and Mr. Whitmore could see the wariness in her eyes. She was still afraid that he might change his mind and fire her after all. "Elena," he said, keeping his voice gentle, "could I speak with you for a moment?" She nodded and followed him to the living room, her posture tense and alert. Mr. Whitmore gestured for her to sit down, but she remained standing. "I owe you an apology," he began. "What I said yesterday was inexcusable. You're not just anything. You're a talented musician who made an incredible sacrifice for someone you love." Elena's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you ... I looked you up? I should have done that before I hired you, honestly. If I had known about your background, I would have understood why you were drawn to the piano." Elena's cheeks flushed red. "I still shouldn't have played it without permission." "I know." "Maybe not. But I also shouldn't have bought a piano that beautiful just to let it sit silent." Mr. Whitmore paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about choices and sacrifices. I realize that I don't know anything about real sacrifice. I've never had to give up something I love for someone else." Elena looked down at her hands. "You do what you have to do." "Yes," Mr. Whitmore agreed. "But that doesn't make it any less difficult, or any less admirable." They stood in silence for a moment, and Mr. Whitmore could see Elena trying to process this unexpected turn in their relationship. Yesterday he had been the angry boss reminding her of her place. Today he was... What? She didn't know how to categorize this new version of him. "Elena," he said finally, "I'd like to make you an offer. But I need you to think about it carefully before you answer." Elena stared at Mr. Whitmore, her heart pounding in her chest. The way he was looking at her, with something that almost seemed like respect, was so different from yesterday that she wondered if she was dreaming. But before he could explain what offer he wanted to make, the doorbell rang. "Ah, that must be Richard," Mr. Whitmore said, glancing at his watch. "I forgot he was coming by tonight. We'll have to continue this conversation later." Elena nodded and started to gather her things, but Mr. Whitmore held up a hand. Actually, would you mind staying for a few more minutes? I might need you to prepare some coffee for my guest. Elena had met Richard Thompson once before. He was Mr. Whitmore's business partner, a man in his 50s who wore expensive suits and talked loudly about his money. Everything about him screamed wealth and privilege, from his gold watch to his perfectly styled gray hair. Elena had always found him unpleasant. The way he looked right through her as if she didn't exist. Mr. Whitmore went to answer the door, and Elena could hear voices in the hallway. Richard's laugh was particularly loud and grating, the kind of laugh that came from someone who had never been told no in his entire life. David, my friend, Richard's voice carried into the living room. I hope you have that excellent scotch ready. I've had a hell of a day dealing with incompetent people. Elena busied herself in the kitchen, preparing a tray with coffee and some of the expensive cookies that Miss Johnson kept stocked for guests. Through the doorway, she could see the two men settling into the leather chairs in the living room. So, Richard was saying, tell me about this new housekeeper of yours. Mrs. Patterson's recommendation, wasn't it? I hope she's better than the last one. At least this one knows enough to stay out of sight. Elena felt her cheeks burn. She was standing less than 20 feet away from them, but Richard was talking about her like she was a piece of furniture. Actually, Elena is quite remarkable, Mr. Whitmore said, and Elena nearly dropped the coffee pot in surprise. She has some unusual talents, Richard laughed. Talents? What kind of talents could a housekeeper possibly have? Making beds? Scrubbing toilets? Elena carried the tray into the living room, keeping her expression neutral. She set it down on the coffee table between the two men and started to leave, but Mr. Whitmore's voice stopped her. Elena, would you mind staying for a moment? Richard, I'd like you to meet Elena Martinez properly. Richard looked up at her with mild interest, the way someone might look at a new car they were considering buying. Pleasure, I'm sure. David tells me you're working out well. Elena nodded politely. Thank you, sir. You know, David, Richard continued, turning back to his host, I was just telling my wife about our daughter's piano recital last weekend. Stephanie played beautifully. She's been taking lessons for 3 years now with the best teacher money can buy. Cost me a fortune, but it's worth it to see her develop some culture. Mr. Whitmore poured himself a cup of coffee, but Elena noticed he didn't touch it. How nice. What does she play? Oh, some simple piece by Mozart. Ein klein nach Musik, I think. The teacher says she has real promise. Might even be ready for more advanced pieces soon. Elena had to bite her tongue. Ein klein nach Musik wasn't even a piano piece. It was written for strings. But she wasn't about to correct Mr. Thompson. That's wonderful, Mr. Whitmore said. I'm sure she's very talented. Richard preened like a peacock. Oh, she is. The teacher says she's never had a student pick things up so quickly. Of course, good. Breeding shows, doesn't it? Natural talent runs in families like ours. Elena felt her jaw clench. She had met plenty of people like Richard Thompson, people who thought that money could buy talent. That privilege was the same thing as ability. Speaking of talent, Mr. Whitmore said casually, I'd be willing to. Bet that Elena here could outplay your daughter on any piece you'd care to name. The room fell silent. Elena felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at Mr. Whitmore in shock. What was he doing? Richard burst out laughing. Your housekeeper? David, that's hilarious. I mean, I'm sure she's very good at what she does, but let's be realistic here. Stephanie has had the best training money can buy. I'm quite serious, Mr. Whitmore said, his voice calm and steady. Elena is an exceptionally gifted pianist. Richard looked from Mr. Whitmore to Elena and back again, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion. You're actually serious, aren't you? Your cleaning lady plays piano? Elena felt humiliated and angry in equal measure. How dare Mr. Whitmore put her in this position? Yesterday he had told her she was just a housekeeper, and now he was using her as some kind of party trick to entertain his guests? Mr. Whitmore, she said quietly, I really should get back to my work. Nonsense, Richard said, suddenly interested. This is too good to pass up. David, are you actually suggesting that your housekeeper could outplay my daughter, who has been trained by professional instructors? I am indeed. Mr. Whitmore stood up and walked toward the piano. Elena, would you mind demonstrating? Elena felt trapped. She wanted to refuse, to walk out of the room with whatever dignity she had left. But she also couldn't afford to lose this job, and something in Mr. Whitmore's expression told her that this wasn't just about entertainment. I don't think that's appropriate, sir, she said carefully. Richard was grinning now, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Oh, come on, don't be shy. I'd love to hear what passes for musical talent among the working class. The condescension in his voice was the last straw. Elena had put up with years of being looked down on, of being treated like she was invisible or stupid just because she cleaned houses for a living. But she wasn't going to stand here and let this arrogant man insult her abilities. Fine, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. What would you like me to play? Richard rubbed his hands together gleefully. Oh, this is rich. How about something challenging? Can you handle Chopin? Which Chopin? Elena asked calmly. Richard blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Well, how about one of the easier pieces? Maybe a waltz? Elena almost smiled. Richard obviously didn't know much about classical music if he thought Chopin's waltzes were easy. Which waltz specifically? The famous one, the one everyone knows. Elena realized that Richard had no idea what he was talking about. He was just throwing out names he had heard before, hoping to sound impressive. I'll play the Minute Waltz, she said. Waltz in D-flat major, Opus 64, no. 1, Richard nodded enthusiastically. Though Elena could tell he had no idea what those numbers meant, she walked to the piano and sat down on the bench, her hands trembling slightly. This wasn't how she had imagined touching these keys again. She had hoped that maybe someday Mr. Whitmore might give her permission to play quietly in the evenings. She had never imagined being put on display like a trained animal performing tricks, but as her fingers found their positions on the keys, Elena felt her anger transform into something else. This was her chance to show Richard Thompson exactly what real talent looked like. This was her opportunity to prove that skill and artistry had nothing to do with money or social class. She began to play, and immediately the room filled with the bright, dancing melody of Chopin's Minute Waltz. Her fingers flew across the keys with perfect precision, each note clear and crisp. The piece was technically demanding, requiring incredible speed and accuracy, but Elena played it as if it were the easiest thing in the world. Richard smug. Expression slowly faded as he realized what he was hearing. This wasn't some amateur struggling through a simple tune. This was professional-level playing, the kind of skill that took years of intensive training to develop. Elena lost herself in the music, forgetting about her audience, forgetting about her humiliation. This was what she was born to do. The waltz spun and danced under her fingers, playful and elegant and absolutely perfect. When she finished, the room was completely silent. Elena kept her hands on the keys for a moment, not wanting to face whatever was coming next. My God, Richard whispered. Where did you learn to play like that? Elena turned around on the bench to face him. The same place your daughter is learning, from professional instructors. The only difference is that I earned my lessons through scholarships and competitions, not through my father's checkbook. Richard's face had gone pale. But you're a housekeeper, yes? Because sometimes life forces you to make choices between what you love and what you need to survive. Mr. Whitmore was watching the exchange with something that looked like satisfaction. Richard, let me ask you this. If Elena were to play against your daughter in a competition, who do you think would win? Richard opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The answer was obvious to everyone in the room. This is ridiculous, he said finally. She may be able to play a simple waltz, but that doesn't mean she could handle more complex pieces. Elena stood up from the piano bench, her anger returning. You want something more complex? Name it, Rachmaninoff, Richard said desperately. Piano Concerto No. 2, first movement. Elena smiled for the first time since this whole scene had started. You want me to play a piece written for piano and full orchestra, by myself, from memory? if you're as good as you claim to be. Elena cracked her knuckles and sat back down at the piano. I won a state competition playing this piece when I was 17. Elena stared at Mr. Whitmore, her heart beating fast. The way he was looking at her now, with something that almost seemed like respect, was so different from yesterday that she wondered if she was imagining it. But before he could tell her about this mysterious offer, the doorbell rang through the house. That must be Richard, Mr. Whitmore said, checking his expensive watch. I completely forgot he was coming over tonight. We'll have to finish talking later. Elena nodded and started gathering her cleaning supplies, but Mr. Whitmore raised his hand to stop her. Actually, would you mind staying a little longer? I might need you to make some coffee for us. Elena knew Richard Thompson from his previous visits to the house. He was Mr. Whitmore's business partner, a man who probably spent more on his suits than Elena made in 6 months. He had that particular way of looking through people like Elena as if they were invisible furniture. His laugh was always too loud, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who had never been told he was wrong about anything. Mr. Whitmore went to answer the door, and Elena could hear their voices echoing in the marble hallway. Richard's booming laugh made her wince as she prepared a coffee tray in the kitchen. David, my friend. Richard's voice carried easily into the next room. I hope you've got that good scotch ready. I've been dealing with idiots all day long. Elena arranged some expensive cookies on a small plate, the kind that Ms. Johnson ordered special from a fancy bakery downtown. Through the doorway, she watched the two men settle into the leather chairs in the living room, their conversation flowing as easily as old friends. Tell me about this new housekeeper, Richard was saying, loosening his tie. Mrs. Patterson recommended her, right? Please tell me she's better than the last one. At least this one seems to know her place and stays quiet. Elena felt her face get hot with embarrassment. She was standing just 20 feet away, but Richard was talking about her like she couldn't hear every word, like she was a piece of equipment they were discussing. Actually, Mr. Whitmore said, and Elena almost dropped the coffee pot, Elena is quite extraordinary. She has some very special abilities. Richard laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. Abilities? What kind of abilities could a cleaning lady possibly have? Is she really fast with a mop? Elena picked up the tray and walked into the living room, keeping her face blank and professional. She set everything down on the glass coffee table between the two men and turned to leave. But Mr. Whitmore's voice stopped her. Elena, could you stay for a minute? Richard, I'd like you to properly meet Elena Martinez. Richard glanced up at her with the same interest he might show a new car he was thinking about buying. Sure. David says you're doing a good job here. Thank you, sir, Elena replied politely, wondering where this was going. You know, David, Richard continued, turning back to his host and completely ignoring Elena again, my daughter had her piano recital last weekend. Little Stephanie played beautifully. 3 years of lessons with the most expensive teacher in the city. Worth every penny to give her some culture, you know? Mr. Whitmore poured coffee but didn't drink it. Elena noticed his hands seemed tense. That sounds wonderful. What piece did she perform? Oh, some Mozart thing. Ein something or other. Her teacher says she's got real talent. Might be ready for harder pieces soon. Richard puffed up with pride like a balloon. Elena had to bite her tongue hard. Ein Nachmusik wasn't even written for piano. It was a string piece. But she wasn't about to correct a man who clearly knew nothing about classical music. I'm sure she's very gifted, Mr. Whitmore said carefully. Oh, she absolutely is, Richard bragged. The teacher says she's never seen a student pick things up so fast, but that's good breeding for you, right? Talent runs in families like mine. It's in the blood. Elena felt her jaw clench. She had met dozens of people like Richard Thompson. Over the years, people who thought money could buy talent, who believed that being born wealthy meant being born special. Speaking of talent, Mr. Whitmore said in a casual voice that didn't fool Elena for a second, I'd bet good money that Elena here could outplay your daughter on any piece you care to name. The room went completely silent. Elena felt like someone had just thrown ice water over her. She stared at Mr. Whitmore in complete shock. What was he doing? Richard burst into laughter that was so loud it echoed off the walls. Your housekeeper? David, that's the funniest thing I've heard all week. I mean, I'm sure she's good at scrubbing floors, but let's be realistic here. Stephanie has had professional training. I'm completely serious, Mr. Whitmore said, his voice steady and calm. Elena is an incredibly talented pianist. Richard looked back and forth between them, his laughter fading into confusion. Wait, you're not joking, are you? You actually think your cleaning lady can play piano? Elena felt humiliated and furious at the same time. How could Mr. Whitmore do this to her? Yesterday he had reminded her that she was just a housekeeper, and now he was putting her on display like some kind of circus act. Mr. Whitmore, she said quietly, I really should finish my work. No way, Richard said, suddenly very interested. This is too entertaining to stop now. David, are you seriously telling me that your housekeeper could beat my daughter, who's been trained by the best instructors money can buy? That's exactly what I'm saying. Mr. Whitmore stood up and walked toward the beautiful black piano. Elena, would you mind showing Richard what real talent looks like? Elena felt trapped between anger and desperation. She wanted to walk out with whatever dignity she had left, but she couldn't afford to lose this job. Something in Mr. Whitmore's eyes told her this wasn't just about entertainment, but she couldn't figure out what game he was playing. I don't think that would be appropriate, sir, she said carefully. Richard was grinning like he was watching his favorite comedy show. Oh, come on now, don't be shy. I'd love to hear what passes for musical talent among the working class these days. The sneer in his voice was the final straw. Elena had spent years being looked down on, being treated like she was stupid or worthless just because she cleaned houses to survive. But she wasn't going to stand there and let this arrogant man mock her abilities. Fine, she said, her voice much sharper than before. What would you like me to play? Richard rubbed his hands together like a child at Christmas. Oh, this is perfect. Let's make it challenging. How about some Chopin? Can you handle something that difficult? Which Chopin piece? Elena asked calmly. Richard blinked, clearly not expecting her to know there was more than one. Well, how about something not too hard? Maybe a waltz? Elena almost smiled. If Richard thought Chopin's waltzes were easy, he obviously knew nothing about classical music. Which waltz specifically? The famous one. The one everyone recognizes. Elena realized that Richard was just throwing out names he had heard somewhere, hoping to sound impressive. He had no idea what he was talking about. I'll play the Minute Waltz, she said. Waltz in D-flat major? Opus 64, number 1? Richard nodded enthusiastically. Though Elena could tell the numbers meant nothing to him, she walked to the piano, her hands shaking slightly. This wasn't how she had dreamed of touching these keys again. She had imagined quiet evenings, playing softly for her own peace of mind. She had never pictured being put on display like a trained animal performing tricks for guests, but as her fingers found their positions on the familiar keys, Elena felt her anger change into something much more powerful. This was her chance to show Richard Thompson what real talent looked like. This was her opportunity to prove that skill and artistry had absolutely nothing to do with money or social position. She began to play, and immediately the room filled with the bright, dancing melody that had made Chopin famous. Her fingers moved across the keys so fast they were almost a blur, but every single note was perfect. The piece demanded incredible speed and precision, but Elena played it like it was as easy as breathing. Richard's smug expression slowly melted away as he realized what he was hearing. This wasn't some amateur stumbling through a simple tune. This was professional-level playing, the kind of skill that took years of intensive training and natural talent to develop. Elena forgot about her audience, forgot about her embarrassment and anger. She lost herself completely in the music. The waltz spun and danced under her fingers, playful and elegant and absolutely flawless. For 3 minutes, she wasn't a housekeeper being humiliated in front of a wealthy man's guest. She was a musician, an artist, doing what she was born to do. When the last note faded away, the room was completely silent except for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Elena kept her hands on the keys for a moment, not wanting to turn around and face whatever was coming next. My God, Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. Where on earth did you learn to play like that? Elena turned around on the bench to face him. The same place your daughter is learning, from professional instructors. The only difference is that I earned my lessons through scholarships and competitions, not through Daddy's credit card. Richard's face had gone completely pale. But you're just a housekeeper, yes? Because sometimes life forces you to choose between following your dreams and keeping the people you love alive. The dinner party had ended 2 hours ago, but Elena couldn't stop her hands from shaking. She sat in the small break room near the kitchen, still wearing her server's uniform, trying to process what had just happened. The guests had finally left, their shocked faces and whispered conversations still fresh in her memory. She had done something tonight that she never thought would happen again. She had performed for an audience and reminded herself who she really was. A soft knock on the door made her look up. Mr. Whitmore stood in the doorway, but he looked different somehow. Gone was the cold, distant employer she had known for weeks. His tie was loosened, his expensive jacket draped over his arm, and there was something in his eyes that Elena had never seen before. Respect. May I come in? He asked quietly. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. She was still processing the fact that he had orchestrated the entire evening, somehow knowing that she would rise to the challenge and prove herself in front of his wealthy friends. Mr. Whitmore pulled up a chair and sat across from her, setting his jacket aside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, though it was the kind of quiet that comes after something important has happened, when both people are trying to find the right words. That was extraordinary, he said finally. I've attended dozens of professional concerts, but I've never heard anything quite like what you played tonight. Elena looked down at her hands, still feeling overwhelmed. I shouldn't have agreed to it. Playing for you guests like that. It felt wrong. Like I was some kind of entertainment you hired for the evening. I know, Mr. Whitmore said, and there was genuine regret in his voice. I handled that badly. I should have asked you privately first, explained what I was hoping to accomplish. Instead, I put you in an impossible position. Why did you do it? Elena asked, finally meeting his eyes. Yesterday you told me I was just a housekeeper. Tonight you made me perform like a trained seal. I don't understand what you want from me. Mr. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The truth? I was angry at myself. After our argument yesterday, I went home and couldn't stop thinking about what you had said, so I looked you up online. Elena felt her stomach drop. You researched me? I found the newspaper articles about your competitions. The photos of you at various recitals. The announcement about your scholarship to Juilliard. He paused, studying her face. And I found the article about why you gave it all up. Elena's eyes filled with tears that she quickly tried to blink away. Then you know why I'm here, cleaning your house instead of performing in concert halls. I know that you sacrificed everything. For your mother? Mr. Whitmore said softly. I know that you turned down a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. I know that you've been working 3 jobs to pay for her medical treatments. The tears Elena had been holding back finally spilled over. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed to be crying in front of her employer. She has an autoimmune disorder. The treatments are experimental and incredibly expensive. Insurance won't cover most of them. How long has she been sick? 7 years. It started right before I was supposed to leave for school. Elena's voice got quieter. The doctors said she might have 2 years to live without treatment, so I stayed. I got a job, then 2 jobs, then 3. I sold my piano to help pay for the first round of medications. Mr. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this information. You sold your piano? Elena nodded, remembering that painful day. It was an old upright that belonged to my grandmother. Not worth much, but it was all I had. The music store owner felt sorry for me and gave me more than it was probably worth. And you've been working ever since, paying for your mother's care. The treatments are helping, Elena said quickly, as if she needed to justify her choice. She's stable now, and the doctors think she could live a normal lifespan if we can keep up with the medications. It's just expensive. Mr. Whitmore stood up and walked to the small window, looking out at the garden that Elena tended to every week. I owe you an apology that goes much deeper than what happened yesterday. When I hired you, I saw exactly what I expected to see, someone to clean my house and stay out of my way. I never bothered to learn anything about you as a person. Most employers don't, Elena said simply. I'm used to being invisible, but you shouldn't have to be. Tonight, when you played for my guests, you weren't invisible. You were the most remarkable person in that room, and everyone knew it. Elena thought about the faces of the dinner guests as she had played. The initial skepticism had quickly turned to amazement, then to something close to awe. She had seen several people wiping away tears during her performance of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Richard looked like he was going to faint. Elena said, with a small smile, remembering Mr. Whitmore's arrogant business partner. Mr. Whitmore chuckled. Richard learned something important tonight about making assumptions based on social class. So did I, frankly. He turned back to face her, his expression serious again. Elena, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. If money weren't an issue, if your mother's medical bills were taken care of, what would you want to do with your life? Elena didn't have to think about her answer. I'd want to teach music. Maybe perform occasionally, but mostly teach. There are so many kids out there who have talent but can't afford lessons. I'd want to give them the chances I had. Not concert performance? Not the career you originally planned? Elena shook her head. I'm 25 now. The classical music world is incredibly competitive, and I've been away from it for 7 years, but teaching ... could still do that. I could help other young musicians avoid having to make the choice I made. Mr. Whitmore nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he had been thinking. What if I told you that I've been making some phone calls over the past few days, talking to some people about your mother's condition and treatment options? Elena felt a spike of alarm. What kind of phone calls? I have a friend who's a specialist in autoimmune disorders, one of the best in the country. I asked him to review your mother's medical records. Don't worry. I had my lawyer make sure everything was done properly and legally. Elena stared at him, not sure whether to be grateful or angry. You had no right to. You're absolutely right. Mr. Whitmore interrupted. I had no right. But I did it anyway, because I couldn't stop thinking about what you've sacrificed. And because I wanted to see if there might be better treatment options available. Elena's heart began beating faster. What did he say? He thinks there's a new treatment protocol that could be even more effective than what your mother is currently receiving, and it's about to be approved by the FDA, which means insurance companies will have to cover it. Elena felt like she couldn't breathe. Are you serious? Completely serious. It would mean switching to a different medication regimen, but the results in clinical trials have been remarkable. Some patients have gone into complete remission. Elena put her hands over her face, overwhelmed by the possibility of hope. How long before it's approved? 6 months? Maybe less? And in the meantime, there are programs available to help cover the cost of your mother's current treatments. My friend gave me the information for several foundations that provide assistance to families in your situation. Elena looked up at him through her tears. Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to me or my mother? Mr. Whitmore sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Because tonight I watched you transform my entire living room with nothing but your talent and your heart. Because I realized that I've been living in a house filled with beautiful things that I never really appreciate. Because you made me understand that real value has nothing to do with money. Elena felt more confused than ever. I still don't understand what you want from me. I want to offer you a choice, Mr. Whitmore said. The same kind of choice you should have had 7 years ago, before life forced your hand. Elena waited, afraid to hope for anything too good to be true. I want to convert the music room upstairs into a proper studio, soundproofed with professional equipment. I want you to start teaching piano lessons here, and I want to help you build a program for kids who can't afford traditional lessons. Elena's mouth fell open. You want me to ... what? I want you to stop being my housekeeper and start being my music teacher. Well, not my teacher specifically. I have no musical talent whatsoever. But I want you to use this house, this piano, to do what you were meant to do. Elena felt like she was dreaming. I can't accept charity. I won't take handouts, no matter how well-intentioned. It's not charity, Mr. Whitmore said firmly. It's a business partnership. You provide the talent and expertise, I provide the space and startup funding. We split the profits from the lessons, and you get to help kids who remind you of yourself. At their age, Elena stared at him, trying to process this incredible offer. And my mother's medical bills? The foundation applications will help with the immediate costs, and the new treatment protocol should be covered by insurance once it's approved. But Elena, I need you to understand something important. She waited. This offer isn't contingent on your mother's situation. 3 months had passed since that life-changing dinner party, and Elena could barely recognize her own life. She stood in what used to be Mr. Whitmore's spare room, now transformed into a beautiful music studio. The walls were covered with sound-absorbing panels, and afternoon sunlight streamed through large windows onto a brand-new upright piano that was perfect for teaching. The room buzzed with the excited chatter of 6 children, ages 8 to 14, waiting for their group lesson to begin. Elena smiled as she watched them. Tommy, whose single mother worked 2 jobs but managed to scrape together enough for lessons. Maria, whose grandmother had driven an hour from the other side of town. Jake, who had been getting into trouble at school until music gave him something positive to focus on. All right, everyone, Elena called out, clapping her hands softly. Let's start with our warm-up scales. The children gathered around the piano, some sitting on the bench, others standing nearby. Elena had discovered that group lessons worked better for some students. They learned from each other, encouraged each other, and made the whole experience more fun and less intimidating. As the lesson progressed, Elena felt that familiar joy that came from watching someone discover their musical abilities. Maria was playing a simple Mozart piece with increasing confidence while Tommy was working on a jazz arrangement that made his eyes light up. Each child was different, with different strengths and interests, but they all shared that spark of curiosity that Elena remembered from her own childhood. After the group lesson ended and the children had been picked up by their parents, Elena had 30 minutes before her next student arrived. She walked downstairs to the main hall, where the grand piano still sat in its place of honor. But now, instead of being a silent monument to wealth, it was regularly filled with music. Elena sat down at the bench and began playing one of her favorite pieces, Debussy's Clair de Lune. The notes flowed through the house like water, soft and peaceful. She had been practicing this piece for a special performance next week at the local community center, a fundraising concert for families dealing with medical expenses. That never gets old. Came a voice from behind her. Elena turned to see Mr. Whitmore standing in the doorway, listening with a smile on his face. Over the past 3 months, their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had expected. He was no longer her employer in the traditional sense, and she was no longer just his housekeeper. They had become business partners and, more surprisingly, friends. How did the meeting with the school board go? Elena asked, finishing the piece and turning around on the bench. Mr. Whitmore's smile grew wider. They said yes. The after-school music program is approved for the fall semester. We'll have access to Lincoln Elementary's music room 3 days a week, and they're providing transportation for the kids. Elena felt her heart skip with excitement. This had been their biggest project yet, creating a free music program for children whose schools had cut their arts funding. Really? They approved the whole proposal? Every bit of it. Free lessons, instrument rental, even the small recital at the end of each semester. Mr. Whitmore pulled out a chair and sat down. Elena, do you realize what you've accomplished in just 3 months? Elena looked around the room that had become the center of her new life. We've accomplished. I couldn't have done any of this without your support. It was true. Mr. Whitmore had kept his word about everything. He had helped her navigate the foundation applications for her mother's medical expenses, which had reduced their monthly bills by more than half. The new FDA-approved treatment was showing remarkable results, her mother's energy was returning, and her latest blood work showed significant improvement. Even more importantly, he had helped Elena rebuild her confidence in herself as a musician and teacher. The converted studio had become her sanctuary, a place where she could share her love of music with others while earning a living that didn't require her to be invisible. "I have some news," Mr. Whitmore said, his tone becoming more serious. "I got a call this morning from Dr. Harrison." Elena's stomach tightened. Dr. Harrison was the specialist who had been overseeing her mother's new treatment. What did he say? "Your mother's latest test results show that the disease markers are at the lowest levels they've been in 7 years. He's cautiously optimistic that she might be able to maintain this improvement with a much less expensive maintenance medication." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. He wants to see her again in 3 months. But if the levels stay stable, she could potentially reduce her treatments from 3 times a week to once a month." Elena stood up from the piano bench so quickly that she nearly knocked it over. Without thinking, she threw her arms around Mr. Whitmore in a hug that surprised both of them. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself." Mr. Whitmore awkwardly patted her back, clearly not used to such displays of emotion. "You did this, Elena. You never gave up, even when life made things impossibly difficult." Elena stepped back, wiping her eyes and laughing at herself. "Sorry. I didn't mean to attack you with a hug. I can't believe how much everything has changed. Don't apologize. I'm not exactly used to good news making people want to hug me, but I think I could get used to it." They were interrupted by the doorbell, signaling the arrival of Elena's next student. Through the window, Elena could see Mrs. Chun walking up the driveway with her 8-year-old grandson, David. Mrs. Chun had been Elena's own piano teacher years ago, and when she heard about the new program, she had immediately signed up her grandson. "That's David Chun," Elena explained. "His grandmother was my teacher when I was his age." Mr. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "The teacher who helped you win all those competitions?" "The very same. She says David has natural talent, but his parents weren't sure they could afford lessons. When I told her about our sliding scale payment system, she cried." Elena went to answer the door, greeting Mrs. Chun with a warm smile. The elderly woman looked around the grand hallway with obvious approval. "Elena, dear, this place is even more beautiful than you described. And that piano ... Mrs. Chun's eyes lingered on the Steinway. "It's magnificent. David, are you ready?" "For your lesson?" Elena asked the shy boy hiding behind his grandmother. David nodded enthusiastically. He had been taking lessons for 6 weeks now, and his progress was remarkable. Elena had a feeling that he might have the kind of talent that could take him far, if he wanted to pursue it. As Elena led David to the studio, Mrs. Chun pulled her aside. "I'm so proud of you," she said quietly. "When I heard what you had given up to care for your mother, my heart broke. But look at you now. You found a way to come back to music and help others at the same time." "I had good teachers," Elena replied. Squeezing her former instructor's hand during David's lesson, Elena found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 7 years ago, she had believed that choosing her mother's health meant giving up music forever. She had thought that sacrifice meant losing herself completely, but sitting here, watching David's face light up as he successfully played through a simple piece, Elena realized she had been wrong about what sacrifice meant. She hadn't lost herself. She had simply found a different way to be herself. After the lesson ended and Mrs. Chun and David left, Elena found Mr. Whitmore in his study, working on his laptop. "I've been thinking about something," she said from the doorway. He looked up from his computer. "What's that?" "The fundraising concert next week. I want to dedicate my performance to you." Mr. Whitmore looked genuinely surprised. "That's not necessary, Elena." "Yes, it is. 3 months ago, I was cleaning your piano every week and dreaming about what it would be like to play it. Now I'm teaching music, helping kids discover their talents, and my mother is getting better. That's not a coincidence." Elena stepped into the study and sat down across from his desk. You gave me something more valuable than money or job security. You gave me back my dignity and my purpose. Mr. Whitmore closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. You know what you gave me? Elena shook her head. You taught me that the most important things in life can't be bought or owned. They can only be shared. He gestured toward the music studio upstairs. Every time I hear music coming from that room, every time I see those kids' faces light up when they master a new piece, I remember what it feels like to be truly proud of something. Elena smiled. So we're even then? Not quite, Mr. Whitmore said with a mischievous look in his eyes. I still owe you for all those weeks when I was a terrible boss who didn't appreciate what was right in front of him. And how do you plan to make up for that? Mr. Whitmore opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small wrapped package. I was saving this for after the concert, but now seems like the right time. Elena unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small silver frame. Inside was the newspaper clipping from her first piano competition win when she was 12 years old. Below it, in elegant script, were the words, "For Elena Martinez, teacher, musician, inspiration. Where did you find this?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Patterson kept it all these years. She gave it to me when I told her about the music program.